Hello and welcome to Produce Talks, the CPMA podcast. I'm your host and CPMA Education Manager, Jason Corley. On today's podcast, once again we go back to our conversation with Ron Lemaire and members of the produce media to tackle issues like trade, changes in technology, marketing trends, and some of the predictions for the industry for the coming year. We're going to jump right into the middle of the conversation, so I'll turn it over to Ron.
Now, Matthew, I have a question for you. There's no denying that we operate in a global industry. Importing and exporting is something that is essential for a healthy Canadian produce industry. This year, we've witnessed two major trade agreements shaping up, the Trans-Pacific Partnership and the Canadian-European Union Comprehensive Economic and Trade Agreement. That could impact how our industry does business. So, Matthew, with respect to trade, I know you have a bit of a different perspective, not being based in North America. And perhaps you can provide us with some of your insights on how you see trade and how you see events over the last year around some of the trade agreements and how they're affecting business.
Thanks, Ron, for the question. And there are almost too many events that have happened over the past year to count, but I'll try to go through a few of them. And the reason that I wanted to talk about trade agreements and as well SPS measures, so that's sanitary and phytosanitary agreements today, is because almost anywhere you look, whether it's Peruvian blueberries in Canada, Mexican raspberries in China, or Polish apples in Vietnam, everyone is trying to make their mark on this globalized world, and it is an interesting climate to be trading. Growers in both developing and developed countries are capitalizing on the purchasing power and curiosity for new products in the BRICS nations and elsewhere. Or perhaps I should actually say BICS, as Russian opportunities have been cut short by embargoes on sanctioning countries, and now Turkey, as I'm sure everyone's read. Meanwhile, those who are allowed in the Russian market face a deteriorating ruble that puts returns at risk. Market access developments are so frequent when you consider the portfolio of crops the international produce industry has on offer, and the range of countries opening their borders and palettes to new food. Just recently, Chinese inspectors visited Argentina to assess their blueberry orchards and practices, while Chilean authorities have been in discussions with China for nectarines and in-shell walnuts. And as this is a Canadian program, we can't ignore what openings of the Chinese market have and could mean for your cherry, blueberry and apple exporters, and of course other products that come down the line. From my examples, you can see that China is one of the most common sources of these developments, partly because of a clamping down on grey channels through Hong Kong, but more through heightened interest in imported fruit, not just in key cities along the eastern coast, but into the interior as well, where the government has been improving new points of entry, such as Sichuan and Xinjiang. On top of that, there are bilateral agreements that relate to tariff cuts. My native Australia has made huge strides on that front this year, with a Japanese trade deal coming into effect, and an FTA with China coming in about 10 days from now. These deals, and a Korean FTA signed last year, have been a boon to the Australian industry, particularly in grapes, citrus and cherries. And in parallel, there's also the ratification of New Zealand's FTA with Korea, which will be a key one to watch for kiwi fruit. We'll have to see how multilateral trade agreements like the TPP, TTIP, and CETA pan out and what they mean for the produce industry. From the outset, I can see that it looks like there may be some hurdles for the US and the EU coming to a consensus on pesticide frameworks. So there is a lot of good news in the international trade, but there is some difficult news as well. I was speaking with a few Chilean growers last week, and for them the one word that described the international trading environment was uncertainty. Yes, the Chilean peso is down on the US dollar, and that's positive. Yes, agreements have been made overseas, but wouldn't it be better to have a stable macroeconomic and socio-political environment for shipping fruit? Unfortunately, I don't think that's so possible at the moment. The Russian embargo that came into effect in August late last year led to a flooded European market, forcing grower associations and companies from the likes of Spain, Italy, the Netherlands, Poland, and other EU nations to look elsewhere. Many have been successful, and I think we'll be seeing a lot more European fruit sold around the world. Perhaps even some Polish apples there in Canada, although the industry is reluctant to overlap with your fruit too much. In January, Turkey will be in the same boat as the EU, and that's been a significant development. So we need to ask ourselves, where will the Turkish be shipping their fruits and veggies, considering Russia has been their leading market? Turkey is the world's largest cherry grower, and they have already pre-signed a Chinese protocol, and they, I imagine, would produce around the same time as the Canadian growers, so that will be something to think about. The uncertainty, though, is not just limited to Russia. There have been a lot of protectionist lobbying actions around the world, and they've often had great effect. One example is the attention paid to South Africa by the EU in tackling citrus black spot disease, and the enormous associated cost for the South African growers. I should clarify that the Spanish citrus industry is world-class and has the right to be concerned about incursions that could damage their groves. But all the attention has been on South Africa while more CBS detections have actually taken place in South American fruit. So that tells me that this is about more than just pests and diseases. In Southeast Asia, this is a particularly relevant issue for North American exporters. Indonesia has come under fire from many countries for its bans, import restrictions and quotas on foreign imports. And other countries in the region that used to let in fruit without too much paperwork are now establishing protocols. So that always has practical discrepancies as well for exporters. And these measures are not only limited to the large markets of the world. In the past year, Papua New Guinea has implemented its own produce import ban, and Ecuador has put 45% tariffs in place in a bid to improve its trade balance. So what does this all mean for produce growers and traders? I think we could sum up the consequences in a few points. Firstly, intercompany and intergovernmental relationships are more important than ever. Exporters and importers alike must stay in closer contact with their partners and rally government departments to be more proactive. That means trade stands at international fairs, networking events, consumer-oriented promotions, and putting themselves on the map. Secondly, while there is all this uncertainty, the risk is worth it, considering the large returns possible. No one wants to fall behind on making the most of opportunities and building a reputation for quality in places like India and China. Thirdly, and that relates to the second point, exporters will also try to offset risks by maintaining their stable markets, even if the returns aren't as phenomenal as in Asia. And I think this is somewhere where Canadian importers can benefit because it's relatively consistent and better understood by shippers than some of these more volatile markets elsewhere. And fourthly, there will be new or unexpected competition. This is partly due to what I mentioned about block markets and a need to diversify, but also the level of plantings that mean countries need these new market agreements or else their industries will no longer be profitable. Countries to watch in that respect would include Peru, Morocco and Colombia, but most importantly actually, the local industries in these attractive markets so coveted by growers.
You touched on a couple key points there, but before I ask another question of you, I'll throw it out to the group if anyone has any other perspective on this topic.
Tom again with the Packer. A couple of issues that I hear about. Worry about the Apple anti-dumping investigation in Mexico. That has the potential to impact the trade between the U.S. and Mexico. And, of course, the country of origin dispute with Canada and Mexico and what might result from that. It looks like Congress will take care of that, but that is still a concern at this point.
I agree, and Tom, I was going to touch on that question around the global markets and some of those barriers that are being put in place or challenges for industry. Matthew, you mentioned working closely with your government and also foreign governments. How do you see that being most effectively done by the industry, whether it's in North America or around the world?
Sure thing. Well, I think it's about approaching all levels of government, local, regional, federal, obviously being quite vocal with the mainstream press to get the word out there. In terms of other issues, there are often trade promotion agencies. I know, for example, Chile has its agency called Pro Chile with many offices all around the world and very proactive people. So it's just a matter of growers being in touch with them and partners also who would import Chilean fruit being in touch with the pro-Chile people and seeing what they can do there. And of course, other countries have their equivalent agencies.
I think just working with your trade associations is probably the most direct way for companies and producers to engage with their governments.
I suppose, John, it's the common voice or singular voice with strength.
Yes, good way to put it, Ron.
I'd like to move on to our next question, and Karen James, this question is for you. Advances in technology are occurring at a very fast rate, and they're impacting every aspect of our supply chain. I was hoping you could give us some insights on some of the advancements in technology that you have observed, and also how you see these advancements impacting our industry.
Thank you. Great question, Ron, because we are in the midst of a consumer revolution, and this marketing revolution is about consumer centricity. So all supply chain members have to understand and realize that it begins and ends with the consumer. How is technology feeding into this? There's a few aspects. First of all, there's the in-store aspect, and from a consumer's perspective, they have libraries full of information available to them, and they're looking for information on transparency, clean ingredients, place of origin, and the good news is, of course, that the produce industry is well placed to answer those questions in an authentic way. Interestingly, at the same time, as consumers are looking for this, mobile technologies have come along and are providing them easy access to all of this information. Alternatively, retailers have started to tap into this mobile technology revolution as well. And through app and iBeacons in stores, they can offer coupons and recipes, product information, and they can personalize all this, because that is what the consumer, particularly the millennial consumer, is looking for, is a personalized offer that's tailored to them. Second aspect of this is the last leg of the supply chain in store, and there's some interesting technologies coming along in that area. Technologies such as smart tags with sensors that will notify staff about a stocks in real time. Kroger and Whole Foods are testing these right now. There's also an interesting technology called Sally, which is basically a RoboCop that a California company has developed. And this particular little robot, the R2-D2 type, roams the aisles and through the smart tag can track out-of-stocks or low items. And they can actually capture up to about 20,000 products an hour. So they can do a medium-sized grocery store in about an hour. This is important because labor costs are starting to accelerate in the retail world, and retailers are beginning to look at ways that they can reduce those costs without impacting the consumer experience. So I would say tying those two things together is serving the consumer better, offering them a better experience in the store, and trying to differentiate themselves as the store of choice. Because with Amazon, Walmart.ca or .com, the consumer has never had more options for fulfilling their household needs.
Brought up some interesting points there, looking at how do we support and build using technology to improve upon our efficiencies, providing that targeted personalized information, and also trying to find cost-effective measures within the store. I think the interesting piece, you touched on online buying, and we heard that in some of the previous questions. We've all heard and have seen Alibaba, one of the global leaders now on food sales online. We've heard about the Chinese market driving online fruit and vegetable sales to their emerging consumer base. I guess taking all of this in, I'll throw the question out to the group. Are there any risks versus rewards that we start seeing coming in, incorporating these new technologies? Do we need to jump at it as an industry and start moving forward, or can we sit back?
Karen James here again. I would say that the risk is that you become completely irrelevant to the marketplace if you don't start adopting these technologies. Walmart last week after Black Friday found that 70% of their online orders are being ordered through mobile devices. So companies such as the CPG world, companies in that world realized too late that they missed the whole health trend. And as we see now, they're beginning to consolidate and acquire, buy rather than build, in order to quickly ramp up in this space. So irrelevancy is a real fear in the food industry right now.
Karen Davidson from The Grower. If I could just tie into some of the themes here, certainly at a grower level, any new technology that saves labor is huge. I think primarily of robotic packing lines. That ties back into traceability, into food safety, and being able to document the authenticity of that product right through to consumer.
I guess one that hasn't been mentioned would be drones. And using them to map out farms and identify water needs and pest risks and that sort of thing. It's still fairly incipient, but we've seen it a lot in the commodity crops, and I think it's only a matter of time before it's more commonplace in the fruit and vegetable industry.
What about actual growing technology? What are your thoughts on the application of biotechnology in our industry and where it'll go in the future?
Matthew Ogg here again. I'd just like to chime in on the GM issue. One company that I find fascinating is called Oxitec, and they use the GM technology to breed sterile fruit flies, which could prove instrumental in eradicating pests, and that's very relevant for growers.
Karen Davidson speaking for The Grower. Yes, we tackled the issue of biotechnology a few months ago in a cover story and remarked on the interesting intersect between the registration of the Arctic apple and the registration of innate potatoes in the U.S. And what really binds those two together is we're talking about the science of cisgenesis, which is talking about rather than taking from another species, we're just taking a trait from the same species. And I'm not sure that the consumers are really making that distinction yet. But what is fascinating to watch is how these technologies are coming to market by companies who are stewarding them in different ways. And in fact, if I remember correctly, the innate potato is actually going to be produced under very controlled conditions with contracted growers and then sold through a processing channel. So those are examples that are very worthy of watching in terms of how they are commercialized and come to market.
And this time with the Packer, the citrus industry had another lowered forecast in Florida. So obviously any biotech application that would deliver a citrus screening resistant tree would be a matter of survival for growers. And I think the consumer would accept that type of a pivot point for the industry. Otherwise, it is a tougher sell. Biotech will be accepted, but then I think consumers, many of them, want to see biotech produce labeled as well.
This is John with the Produce News. I agree with that. I think the GM situation will continue to progress, especially with the projections of population worldwide that are being talked about by 2050, something like 20 billion people or something like that. I don't have the exact number. But I think it's just going to you have to feed those people somehow, and to increase yields, whether it's by GM or other, is going to have to be explored. And also with the drought situation in California and out west, there could be a GM application that is developed to, come up with more drought-resistant produce items.
And I am briefly interrupting the conversation to bring you a message from Les Mallard, our CPMA membership chair. Les, I'm wondering if you can let me know some of the benefits that Chiquita has with being a member of CPMA.
Thanks, Jason, for this opportunity. The CPMA value equation spans many areas of interest for Chiquita. However, one of the areas of interest I want to key in on is the CPMA annual convention. The convention offers touch-point opportunities with all the major players in the Canadian produce industry in various settings, whether business or social. No other produce function in Canada offers the scope the CPMA annual convention offers. Having this is a tremendous value for our organization.
Thanks, Les. And now back to the conversation.
Now, I'd like to turn to a topic that I think everyone will have an interesting perspective on. Produce has some really innovative and forward-thinking marketing programs. I'd like to throw it out to the group to see if you have any examples or trends that you've noticed over the past year that have really advanced how we market and sell produce.
Well, I think it is very much a grassroots effort on the part of the brands and the retailers. The overarching programs, of course, CPMA, Half Your Plate, are fabulous, and they drive these initiatives. But it really is at the grassroots level. And essentially what I'm seeing is back to basics. I'm reading time and time again that consumers are looking for recipes. As low-tech as that may be, they want to know how to cook these kalettes, the broccolinis. They need to understand how they can feed their family in a clean way with healthy food. And it really isn't any more complicated for the consumer than that.
Karen, on that note, food literacy, have you seen a small change and growth around food literacy because of this recipe and millennial interest on cooking? Or are we still on an uphill battle to try and build a population that knows how to produce and cook its own food?
Just to build on my previous point, I would say that cooking has changed for a lot of people, especially millennials. It's no longer a daily duty, it's a hobby. And because it's a hobby, it's a pleasure, and therefore food literacy has increased vastly. Anyone who has a millennial in their life will know that they know way more about food than their parents do. They know where it comes from. They know the benefits of it. They know what foods complement each other. So to answer your question, Ron, I think food literacy is at an all-time high.
One other thing that came to mind was just tapping into that foodie trend of millennials and wanting to know more about where their food comes from. Frida's, I'm not sure if I think a few of you would have seen the film Fear No Fruit that Frida's put out. I'm not sure how much we can call that marketing, but it certainly does put what the produce industry does on the map. And I think that does get people more interested in fruits and vegetables and exotic produce as well.
Well, I can't resist mentioning the example of the Cold Snap pear. It's a made-in-Canada pear, and when I say that, there's been something like 25 years of breeding effort go into this pear. What's exciting from a grower level is that it's a fire blight-resistant pear, which is an important disease of of that palm fruit. But what's really exciting is that a number of industry groups have got together, including a growers cooperative and the Research and Innovation Center, to brand this pear and to bring it to market. It has been called the cold snap pear because it is a pear that actually needs some storage in terms to make it better, and it extends the normal season of the Bosque and Bartlett pears. Folks behind the marketing program have done a stellar job in branding it in terms of stand-up pouches, in terms of providing a website, and in terms of delivering on their promise in getting it into the retail chains across Canada. So I think it's a really unique story in terms of taking a pear, which is part of sweet pea category, and really re-energizing it for the future.
We hear a lot about Eat Brighter, and then, of course, just on the edge of awareness is the FNV, which has a couple of pilot projects in the East and West Coast. So I think those are marketing efforts that are industry supported, but yet not having a lot of critical mass to make them highly impactful, perhaps, so far. Of course, the FNV is just in a pilot stage, but Eat Brighter, I've heard that there's some need for more retailers to fully embrace it, so maybe that's a fair criticism. I think the idea of generic marketing is not something that is appealing to the industry. There's so many marketers that do a great job of marketing in their niche varieties, their niche categories that marketing generically in a big way doesn't appeal, but I think we're seeing a lot of creative marketers out there in the produce industry, and these generic efforts are succeeding at the level that they can with the limited marketing dollars behind them, I think.
Those are all great ideas, and a couple of them I had in mind also. One thing that I did note over the past year or so is the more development of the snack size packages for fruits and vegetables and the grab-and-go packs. I think it's a great idea to offer fruits and vegetables to people as they will use them and not try to force them to use them in certain situations. You know, if they can pick up something that'll fit in their cup holder in their car and eat some berries on the way to work, I think, marketers are starting to catch on to that a little bit more to take note of going forward.
I know Karen Davidson said a little bit about packaging elements. Packaging is a key part of where the industry has gone. From many years ago where product was sold in basket at retail to now having a much more dynamic and much more complicated package offering. What is the most innovative packaging product and tool that you've seen in the last year?
John here from the Produce News. I think back to my point with what I just discussed with the snack packages, I think the top seal, the resealable packs are pretty interesting. It allows consumers to eat what they want and put it back for later use.
Along that line, again, Tom with the Packer is a Chelan Fresh up in Chelan, Washington. They have a cup of cherries. It's also an interesting concept with the top access of the cup and kind of selling it in a more upscale coffee shop or what have you. That's kind of innovative, I think.
There was an interesting product launched at Fruit Attraction in Madrid, and it's a plastic bowl that kind of looks a little bit like a berry with berries inside of it, and that was very popular there for the Spanish and European market.
To wrap up, I'd like to offer everyone an opportunity to provide your insights of what you think will be the major story or trend for the produce industry in 2016.
Sustainability is going to take on a new meaning as the industry does a post-mortem of the climate change talks in Paris. I think with the new federal government in Canada and other new governments across our country that the axis has already shifted in very recent months. Nobody's looking forward to carbon taxes or cap and trade or how that might translate into additional burdens on day-to-day business. But I do think that the big story in 2016 is how the entire food chain will look at energy costs. And by that I mean the energy costs of growing, cooling, transporting, storing, and distributing food. And when I talk about energy, I'm really speaking in very broad terms of electricity, natural gas, and water. And this is where I think there is an intersect between the food safety, packaging, and marketing themes. I mean, we're going to need to look at the questions of how we're going to reduce energy costs without compromising the plastic wrap or compromising the quality of fruit that's in long-term controlled atmosphere storage. And certainly what I'm seeing with some of the growers that I'm talking to is that, yes, they've had crop protection consultants in the past, but the future is going to be an energy consultant to move their business forward.
Karen was discussing costs and that overall squeeze on inputs that growers are feeling, and it's something that's happening everywhere around the world. Many growers as well, high levels of debt because they've had a difficult commercial situation and haven't often been able to make the investments necessary to advance and catch up with all the changes that are going on. And I think one trend that we'll continue to see in 2016 will be acquisitions from countries that do have the cash to afford that, and one of those countries being China. So there'll be a lot of consolidation and acquisitions coming from China overseas, but also within China as the local companies try to band together and form a better reputation amongst themselves with consumers and compete somewhat with these foreign brands.
Well, I guess I'll pick up the mantle of food safety again, and that's been in the news with the Chipotle situation, and I guess the tension between high food safety standards and the ability to source locally. I think there's little doubt that at least a good half of consumers care about local produce, but what will be the opinion of buyers, I guess, that have to balance food safety concerns with the ability to provide what consumers want. So I think we'll see a little tension between food safety and the local trend. And then also just as the cost of the Food Safety Modernization Act are realized, I think there'll be some awareness of just how much it will cost. I think the FDA estimated about $366 million annually for the produce safety rule and another $138 million for foreign farms. So there's quite a bit of money going to be invested in complying with these regulations.
I think we're going to really begin to see the shift from consumers eating whole fruits and vegetables to HMR solutions. They're looking for convenience, and retailers, grocers in particular, are getting much, much better at providing healthy, convenient meal options, meal kits, for instance, that can be just picked up within store. So you're going to see a shift within grocery from wonderful groups of apples and pears to those apples and pears being used by the retailer or by an off-site commissary to prepare meals. And we're seeing that happening now, but as millennials start to form their families and they're having their first child, certainly when they have their second and they don't want to go to McDonald's particularly, they will go to the grocery store and they will look for these meal solutions. So I see that as an emerging but picking up steam trend within the industry.
I have two things that I'm going to be looking at for 2016. The first is the El Nino, which I think is going to have quite an impact on the growing end of the produce industry, at least in the U.S. and probably South America and other places. But right now, we have some pretty tight markets for veg coming out of California, and I think going into the first few months of the year, they're predicting quite a bit of rain, which I think will hamper efforts to both plant and harvest. So I think you're going to see some tight markets, maybe for the first 6 months of the year. And also, I'm intrigued by what will happen going forward with the retail mergers and acquisitions that were so rampant in 2015. As everybody knows, the Albertsons Safeway merger and what followed with Hagen when they bought a whole bunch of stores and then had to divest them after they filed bankruptcy. I think that's going to create some opportunities for smaller retailers and independents to raise their profile. So that'll be interesting to watch as well.
Well, thank you, everyone, for your thoughts. It's always valuable exercise to reflect on what has happened during the year, and with that knowledge, to turn forward and prepare ourselves for the coming year. I hope everyone enjoyed participating today, and I'd like to once again thank you for taking the time to be here. This was extremely informative and valuable to our membership and the community. Thank you, everyone.
And that's all that we have for you on this podcast and in 2015. We'll see you in 2016, but until then, you can rate, subscribe to us on iTunes, or if you're on a BlackBerry, we're on Novex. If you're on an Android, you can find us on Stitcher. I'd like to thank everyone for participating. John Grove from the Produce News, Karen Davidson from the Grower, Tom Karst from the Packer, Karen James from Grocery Business, and Matthew Ogg from Fresh Fruit Portal. And of course, Ron Lemaire, president of CPMA, for facilitating the conversation. Our music today was from bensounds.com, and it's Clap and Yell. If you'd like to contact us, let us know how we're doing, you can do so by writing an email at podcast@cpma.ca. We also have a brand new form on the CPMA website in the podcast area to let us know some of the things you'd like to hear on the podcast. Maybe you want us to do a topic about something really interesting that a particular company is doing, or a trend that you see emerging in the industry. We'd love to hear from you. Until next time, make a healthy choice. Make half your plate fruits and veggies.